Breathe in deeply. Can you smell it? That suffocating blend of frankincense and fear that clings to ancient stones like invisible chains. Feel the chill seeping through your bones as you stand in the shadow of towering Gothic pillars, each one carved by hands that knew suffering intimately. Now listen carefully. Do you hear those tiny footsteps? They echo like a death knell across marble floors worn smooth by centuries of similar tragedies, each step more hesitant than the last. Turn your gaze toward the altar and witness something that will haunt you forever. There, struggling beneath the weight of golden silk and precious stones that cost more than entire villages, walks a child whose wedding dress weighs more than her entire body. 6-year-old Isabelle of France, her small hands trembling as she clutches a wooden doll, the only friend she has left in this world of monsters wearing crowns and calling themselves civilized. Step closer. Look into her eyes. What do you see? Terror so pure it seems to glow like candlelight? Confusion that cuts deeper than any blade? The last flicker of innocence before it's extinguished forever by adult hands that have forgotten what protection means? This is November 1396, St. Paul's Cathedral, London. You're not just watching history unfold like some distant academic exercise. You're witnessing the systematic destruction of a human soul, orchestrated by kings and blessed by God himself. But here's what will chill your blood to ice and keep you awake for nights to come. This isn't some ancient barbarism from distant lands we can dismiss as primitive. This is Christian Europe at its golden peak. This is civilization. This is what they called diplomacy, what they praised as statecraft, what they recorded in their histories as triumph. And what you're about to discover will shatter every romantic notion you've ever held about medieval times. The man waiting at that altar? Richard II of England. 29 years old, educated, cultured, a patron of arts and poetry. Watch how his eyes track her every stumbling step like a predator sizing up prey, calculating not love, but possession. He's not nervous about marrying a child. Such moral considerations never cross his royal mind. He's calculating how long he can wait before claiming his rights. And those rights? They were negotiated, documented, and sealed with wax and gold by men who measured a girl's value by the weight of her dowry. But to understand how we arrived at this moment of pure evil, you need to journey with me into the bowels of medieval France, where madness ruled a kingdom and a mother sold her own daughter for 30 pieces of silver and political advantage. Transport yourself to the Louvre Palace, November 9th, 1389. Feel the marble beneath your feet grow cold as winter death as you walk these cursed corridors where sanity came to die. The very air vibrates with tension so thick you could cut it with a blade, thick with the electricity of approaching storm. Servants scurry past like rats fleeing a sinking ship, their eyes fixed firmly on the ground because to look up might mean witnessing horrors that would steal their sleep forever. Follow that sound echoing through these halls. Those aren't screams of childbirth. They're the tortured wails of Charles VI, King of France, who believes his body is made of glass and that a single touch will shatter him into 1,000 glittering fragments of royal madness. Press your face to that keyhole if you dare. See him there, cowering in the corner of his royal chamber like a beaten dog, whimpering about invisible assassins stalking him through his own palace, scratching at his skin until it bleeds raw. This is the King of France, the most powerful monarch in Europe, commander of the mightiest armies, inheritor of Charlemagne's legacy, reduced to a gibbering madman who soils himself in terror. His guards have strict orders to keep their distance, not out of respect for royal dignity, but because their sovereign believes human contact will destroy him like acid dissolving flesh. Watch him scratch at his skin until rivers of blood run down his arms, convinced that demons are trying to crawl out of his flesh from the inside. The madness comes and goes like a plague with its own twisted schedule. One day, he's the cultured king France desperately needs, composing poetry that would make angels weep and conducting diplomatic meetings with the wisdom of Solomon. The next, he's stripping naked and howling through the palace corridors like a wolf, or forgetting he has a wife and children, or worse, much worse, remembering them but believing they're demons sent from hell's deepest pits to steal his immortal soul piece by bloody peace. Medieval medicine stands utterly helpless against this curse that seems sent by God himself. Physicians bleed him until he's white as fresh fallen snow, draining life in the hope of draining madness. Priests perform exorcisms until their voices crack and fail, calling down heaven's power against hell's invasion. Alchemists feed him concoctions that would kill a warhorse in minutes. Nothing works. France is ruled by a lunatic, and in the shadows, human vultures gather to feast on the corpse of a kingdom. Now turn with me toward the opposite wing of this palace of nightmares. Can you hear that? The screams of labor, the frantic whispers of midwives who know they're witnessing history in the making. Queen Isabeau of Bavaria is bringing another life into this world. Her fourth daughter, another mouth to feed in a kingdom slowly bleeding to death. Watch those midwives exchange glances heavy with dread and unspoken knowledge. Another girl child. Another political tool to be forged in fire and sold to the highest bidder when the price is right. They name her Isabelle, and understand this with crystal clarity that cuts like winter wind. From the moment she draws her first breath in this world of wolves, she is not a child. She is currency. She is a living, breathing treaty waiting to be signed in blood, a diplomatic solution wrapped in swaddling clothes. Let me paint you a portrait of evil incarnate. Isabelle's mother, Isabeau of Bavaria. Picture a woman so cold, so utterly devoid of maternal instinct, that even medieval chroniclers, men literally paid to make royalty look virtuous and noble, couldn't hide their revulsion when writing about her twisted nature. Where others saw tragedy in the king's madness, she saw opportunity glinting like gold coins in firelight. Where others saw duty to protect the innocent, she saw weakness to be exploited. Every episode of Charles's insanity meant more power she could seize with her pale, grasping fingers that knew no satisfaction. More treasure she could hoard in secret chambers like a dragon counting coins. More lovers she could take while her husband writhed in madness mere rooms away, his screams mixing with her laughter. Court records, and yes, they kept meticulous accounts of royal adultery because scandal has always been currency. Document at least 3. Different men sharing the queen's bed while the king was physically restrained by guards who could hear his tortured wails through stone walls. One chronicler wrote with barely controlled disgust that Isabeau cared more for her jewels than her children, more for her pleasures than her prayers, more for gold than for God. Another claimed she would entertain her lovers in chambers adjacent to where Charles VI was being held during his violent episodes, the sounds of their coupling mixing with the king's tortured wails like some symphony composed in hell's deepest circles. This was the woman raising Isabelle. This was her model of motherhood. Cold calculation dressed in silk and perfume, wearing a crown like a weapon. Can you even begin to fathom growing up in this house of horrors? The Louvre Palace of Isabelle's childhood wasn't a fairy tale castle with singing birds and dancing courtiers. It was a maze of murder and conspiracy where death lurked behind every tapestry, where poison was served with dinner and children learned to taste their food for the metallic tang of approaching death. 2 savage factions, the Armagnacs and Burgundians, waged war for control of the Mad King's body like dogs fighting over a bone still dripping with meat. Assassination attempts were as common as morning prayers. Noble children didn't play in sunny gardens filled with laughter. They huddled in fortified courtyards while guards scanned the battlements for crossbow bolts aimed at tiny hearts that had never known safety, while other children learned their letters and played with toys carved by loving hands. Little Isabelle was mastering the art of survival in a world that wanted to devour her. She learned to read the warning signs of her father's approaching madness before she could read words on a page. The way his eyes would dart frantically around the room like a caged animal seeking impossible escape. The tremor in his hands that started as a flutter and became an earthquake. The sudden, deadly silence that meant everyone should flee before the violence exploded like a dam bursting under pressure. Picture this scene burned forever into a 4-year-old's mind like a brand seared into flesh. Little Isabelle, clutching her wooden doll with fingers that never learned to relax, watches in frozen terror as her father, her protector, her king, the man who should shield her from all harm, lunges at her mother with murder blazing in his mad eyes like fires of hell, convinced that Isabeau is a demon sent from the abyss to steal his soul. Watch the child's face crumple as royal guards tackle their sovereign to the ground while he screams that his wife is melting his bones with her demonic touch. This was normal. This was Tuesday. This was the world that forged Isabelle's soul in the fires of trauma that never stopped burning. But here's the detail that will break your heart into pieces you'll never be able to reassemble. A secret buried in dusty ledgers that historians pray you'll never find because it reveals too much truth. The French royal treasury, keeper of meticulous expense records that document every luxury and necessity, contains an entry from 1394 that reads like a death warrant written in accounting ink. Payment for iron bars. Princess Isabelle's chamber windows, installation urgent. Those bars weren't installed for decoration or royal grandeur. They weren't security against outside threats or foreign invaders. They were prison bars installed because a 5-year-old princess had tried to throw herself from her window, choosing the stone courtyard below over another day in her golden cage. Even at that tender age when other children still believed in magic and happy endings, death seemed preferable to the life she was living. A child, not yet old enough for school, had already decided that the ground below was kinder than the world above. The childhood trauma was just the prelude to a symphony of suffering. In 1395, as Isabelle played with dolls and learned to curtsy properly while her world crumbled around her, messengers galloped from England carrying a proposal that would solve many of France's problems and destroy one little girl's life completely and irreversibly. Richard II of England was drowning in political quicksand. His first wife, Anne of Bohemia, had died, leaving him without heirs and surrounded by enemies sharpening their knives in shadowy corners. His nobles plotted rebellion in whispered conversations that grew bolder each day. His treasury bled gold faster than a severed artery, emptying like water through a broken dam. He needed peace with France, needed it desperately, and he needed it before his kingdom collapsed into civil war that would bathe England in blood. The French council saw salvation wrapped in the form of one 6-year-old girl who had never harmed anyone in her short life. They could buy 30 years of peace with English gold, and all it would cost was Isabelle's childhood, adolescence, and quite possibly her life. A bargain, they declared with satisfaction. Now, witness this scene that should be carved into Hell's Gates as a warning to future generations. Picture the negotiations. Grown men in velvet robes worth more than entire villages sitting around polished mahogany tables in the Louvre's most luxurious chamber, their faces illuminated by candlelight that casts dancing shadows like demons on the walls. They're haggling over a child's flesh like merchants in a slave market, weighing her value in gold and political advantage. Study their faces carefully, the calculating expressions, the way they lean forward hungrily when discussing terms like wolves scenting blood, the complete absence of human compassion in their eyes that glitter with greed. The English ambassadors initially balk at Isabelle's age with performances of shocked virtue. Even by medieval standards, where childhood was a luxury few could afford, 6 years old is shockingly young for marriage. Most royal brides are at least 12, old enough that they might survive childbirth, old enough to understand what's being done to their bodies and souls. But listen to the French negotiators' counter-argument, and feel your soul recoil in horror at the casual evil of their words. They explain in voices smooth as poisoned honey flowing over silver tongues that taking Isabelle young is actually an advantage worth paying extra for. Richard can shape her to his preferences like a sculptor molding clay. They purr with satisfaction. She'll grow up knowing only English customs, only Richard's desires, only the cage he builds around her with bars made of tradition and sealed with royal authority. She'll be, in their exact words that survive in diplomatic records for anyone brave enough to read them, more completely his than any woman has ever belonged to any man. They were negotiating the grooming of a 6-year-old child with the same casual efficiency they'd use to buy a horse. State-sanctioned, internationally approved, church-blessed grooming. The sale of innocence signed with royal seals and blessed by men who claimed to serve God. But the degradation plunges even deeper into evil's black heart. The English demand to inspect their purchase first because even in medieval times, buyers wanted to examine expensive goods before completing the transaction. Yes, inspect her like livestock at market, like a broodmare being evaluated for breeding potential. Picture this abomination if you can bear it. French courtiers parading little Isabelle before the English delegation, while foreign nobles examine her teeth to check for defects, study her posture for signs of deformity that might affect her value, run their adult hands through her child's hair to test its texture and color in different lights, watch them make notes on parchment about her breeding potential, while she stands there in confusion, not understanding why these strange men are touching her and speaking about her as if she were a prize cow. Watch Isabelle's face during this inspection that strips away her humanity piece by piece. See the confusion in her innocent eyes as grown men make her walk back and forth like a show pony while they discuss her future usefulness in producing heirs. Listen to their comments that survive in letters and diplomatic reports. She will ripen beautifully. One English lord observes with the satisfaction of a man who believes he's made a wise investment. Her hips should widen properly for childbearing. Another notes with clinical detachment. She is 6 years old. The final contract is struck in the summer of 1396, signed in blood disguised as ink on parchment that might as well be her death warrant. France will provide 800,000 livres, an astronomical sum equal to nearly 2 years of English royal revenue, enough gold to buy entire kingdoms. In exchange, Richard gets Isabelle, a 28-year truce with France that's supposed to last a generation, and the return of captured territories that had been lost in previous wars but buried in the marriage contract, preserved in the English National Archives where modern historians often skip over it in embarrassment. Lies a clause that epitomizes medieval evil in its purest form. While the marriage won't be consummated until Isabelle reaches proper age, a phrase deliberately left vague, Richard will have all other rights of a husband immediately upon the ceremony's completion. What were those rights that made grown men nod in understanding? The absolute authority to control where she lives, what she learns, who she speaks to, what she eats, when she sleeps, how she prays. The right to share her bed, because medieval nobles believed young brides should grow accustomed to their husband's presence from the earliest possible age, like breaking a horse to saddle. The right to own her body, her mind, her soul as completely as he owned his horses or his hunting dogs or the land that bore his name. They signed away her childhood, her freedom, her very humanity with flourishes of a quill pen dipped in gold that might as well have been dipped in her blood. When palace servants finally told Isabelle she was to become Queen of England, traveling across the sea to marry a king, she asked a question that her governess recorded in private letters that survive to this day like accusations against history itself. Will I be able to bring my dolls? Stop. Read that again. Let it sink into your bones like ice water in January. A 6-year-old child's first concern about becoming queen of a foreign kingdom was whether she could keep her toys. Because that's what she was, a little girl who still played with dolls, who still needed help braiding her golden hair, who still cried when she scraped her knees, who still believed that adults existed to protect children from harm rather than to sell them for political advantage. The answer, whispered by servants who dared not speak it aloud, was that she could bring one doll. One. The rest would remain in France, like everything else she'd ever known or loved. October 1396 arrives like an executioner's footsteps. You're standing in the Louvre's grand courtyard, watching the farewell ceremony that's really a funeral disguised as a celebration with ribbons and music. Focus on the human drama unfolding before your eyes like a Greek tragedy written in blood and tears. There's Charles de Tux in one of his rare moments of clarity, The fog of madness temporarily lifted from his tormented mind like clouds parting before sudden sunlight. Watch him bless his daughter with tears streaming down his royal face like rain on stone, each drop a small piece of his breaking heart. See how tightly he holds her small body, so tight that guards have to physically pry his arms open to separate father from child. Watch him lean down to whisper something in her ear that makes her dissolve into heartbroken sobs that echo off the courtyard walls. We'll never know what. Final words. A mad king spoke to his doomed daughter in their last moment together. But palace servants later testified under oath that Isabelle screamed for her father until her voice cracked and failed, long after the Louvre had vanished behind hills and her childhood had disappeared forever like smoke on the wind. The journey from Paris to Calais stretches for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of hell disguised as a royal progress. A terrified child being carried further from everything she'd ever known with each turn of the wagon wheels that sound like drum beats marking time until her execution. Her French attendants later swore in depositions that she barely ate enough to keep a sparrow alive, barely slept more than minutes at a time before nightmares would wake her screaming. She clutched her favorite wooden doll, a simple toy carved by her childhood nurse with loving hands until her small fingers bled from the pressure, until the wood was stained red with her grief and desperation. The doll became her anchor to everything she was about to lose forever. November 1396. St. Paul's Cathedral has been transformed into something that would make angels weep. The wedding ceremony unfolds with all the pageantry evil can buy. When Isabelle finally speaks her vows in a voice barely above a whisper, when Richard places the ring on her tiny finger with hands that could crush her like a flower, when the Archbishop pronounces them husband and wife in the sight of God and man, something dies in that vast cathedral. Innocence dies. Childhood dies. Hope dies. And a 6-year-old girl becomes property of a man who sees her not as a person, but as a political solution wrapped in silk and crowned with gold. This is the story they don't want you to know. This is the truth behind the pageantry and poetry. This is medieval Europe stripped of its romantic disguises. A world that devoured children and called it civilization. Isabelle of France. Remember her name. Remember her story. Remember that evil triumphs when good people look away and call cruelty tradition. The little girl who asked if she could bring her dolls to her wedding deserves at least that much. She deserves to be remembered not as a queen or a symbol, but as a child who should have been protected and wasn't, as a girl who should have been loved but was sold instead. Remember Isabelle, and never forget that the real monsters of history weren't dragons or demons. They were human beings who created systems that ground children into political instruments and called it the natural order of things.